Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Your video is about to start. I wanted to remind you of our newer Wednesday, 1 p.m. live stream Q&A on all things Social Security. Visitors are welcome to post a question in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it. It's on a first come, first serve basis, so please get there on time. Otherwise, if you care to be a member and get some different kinds of perks, feel free to click the join button below or just click it to learn about them. Anyway, I hope to see you Wednesday. If not, enjoy the video. Bye now. Good morning. This is for Matthew. Matthew, this is question 1 of, I think, a total of 3. For anyone who was here at the March 5th live Q&A session, Matthew had wanted some questions answered with regard to the SSA 3368. That is the medical portion side that is attached basically to your application. If you are doing it online, it'll be the part that immediately you get popped into after you submit the first part. I believe the first part is technically the application, but if you don't get the second part in, they will nag you for it, understandably, and then they will close your case if you don't get it in, because that's the part where they can give it to the medical workup office with all that medical information to start their job. Okay, so, you can look at the SSA 3368 paper form, which should be available online if you want to see in advance what kind of questions are going to be asked of you on the online one, because it's basically the same questions, just 2 different methods of getting them done. Okay, so Matthew's question, his first question, and I didn't think it would be appropriate to do it at the live Q&A because I'd have to dig up the paperwork, look at the question, and I didn't think it was appropriate to do that when everyone's there for, getting their questions and answers in. So I told him he could email me them, and if it's at all possible to produce a video answer, I would do it. So today is the next day, and I'm doing the first one. I'm going to get this out, and I will share it, Matthew, to you. I think you're a member, so members early access, and then everyone else can get it when it gets published on YouTube for everybody else. Okay, and because I don't publish things more than once a day, it could be a few days out. All right. It is one of the benefits of being a member. You get things as soon as they come off the line, if you will. All right. So his question, concern number 9. I just got to find it. Number 9 asks, does anyone else other than your healthcare providers have your medical information? And Matthew says that he was told by one attorney rep, and I'll quote, when I was talking to her, that Section 9 on the SSA 3368 form, that I shouldn't or don't need to put down information about that question if that information would be before my alleged onset date or if I did SGA activity after that date. And I will say, practitioners will vary. Reasonable minds can differ, but I disagree. And I'll tell you why. When they talk about information from entities other than your healthcare provider, that can be a workers' comp attorney. That can be a workers' comp carrier. If you don't have an attorney, that could be the respondent's attorney, which is basically the workers' comp carrier's attorney. It could be IEPs from school. It can be it could be caseworker. If you have a caseworker that helps you navigate the healthcare system and make appointments. I feel like I have a runny nose, guys. Or about to. It can, they give you a slew of examples of what it could be. So, it could even be your long-term disability carrier. There's so many things. Now, this particular practitioner says that if the information they have precedes your alleged onset date, then I guess she doesn't think it's important. The reason why it can be very important is that you're number one, you might have erred with your alleged onset date. And oftentimes the SSA clerks at the field office err in the alleged onset date. Not always, some are really good, but we've got a lot of new people the last several years, and um, they don't necessarily nail it down properly. We often ask for amended alleged onset dates to something earlier because the SGA activity warrants it once it's properly evaluated. Um, so that's one thing. Another thing is, let's say your alleged onset date is correct. The other information pertaining that could have nuggets of information pertaining to your disabilities, any of your impairments, often there is a progression where everything kind of like accelerated into being fully disabled, but the impairments were growing at the time. Not enough to be disabled from old jobs back then, but it shows that your shoulder was and how it got hurt. Or if it's a mental health case, this is very common. That is very progressive sometimes. It could be the mental health records from when you were a child that shows you needed an IEP, maybe you needed extra help at school, maybe an aide to help you, stay on track. Whatever the case may be, um, those things precede your alleged onset date, usually. So why wouldn't you want them to show the progression? Doesn't mean you're saying you legally met the criteria of a disabled adult when you were, 12, but that shows the level of impairment and how long it's lasted, which is definitely relevant to a historical perspective. So that is one thing, showing the progression. Let's say you had an injured shoulder and it was a workers' comp case and it was 4 years ago. And you weren't disabled, you still went to your job. Maybe it was accommodated, whatever it was, you were working SGA and you were still on your job. But you had an accommodation where you didn't use your left arm, let's say it was your left arm shoulder, that information will be relevant because if your shoulder is still not 100% like it was when you were 20 before you had any problems with it, it might be that you can no longer be expected to carry 75 pounds 8 hours a day. So therefore, the fact that you have the bad shoulder and where it came from is relevant because it'll help you carve out all those shoulder jobs that needed that otherwise perfect shoulder that actually isn't perfect. This is particularly important if you haven't been treating for the shoulder because you've been concentrating on other things and you don't really need the shoulder as much. Doesn't mean it's not impaired. You just don't focus on it because you're focusing on the things that took you out of work, out of your past job. But that shoulder can definitely be used to carve out other jobs in the economy, which can be important if you're under 50 or over 50. So those papers can and often are really relevant in terms of helping illustrate the problem, where it was, where it came to, and that it exists. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that you should go get that followed up on. Doesn't change that at all. And I'm one of the biggest nags with all my people about following up with everything. But the past records are going to show how that progressed and how it now clearly it didn't improve. So that is an impairment now that can be considered. Um, the limitation, this other representative also mentioned about if you've worked SGA after that non-medical entity had records on you, then don't provide it then either. I fully disagree. Number one, most people are not really good at figuring out SGA, and Matthew, you might be, but a lot of people aren't. Their numbers will look like SGA, but then and so then it is assumed SGA, but had they submitted the 820 or the 821 showing that no, I have impairment related work expenses, always, or if I was a gigger, doing Uber or Lyft or selling things on eBay or whatever, I have business expenses that knock it down. That SGA isn't always SGA. Very often, it isn't. So, and again, so for that reason, the erroneous SGA calculations, oftentimes the SSA clerk isn't going to inquire about impairment-related work expenses or business expenses. They're going to look at your Social Security earnings statement. If you never wrote those things off, well, particularly the business expenses, if you're a gigger work or self-employed work, they're not going to look to see if you had business expenses that you forgot to put on a Schedule C when you filed your tax return. And now it looks like that 20 grand you made was really your net earnings from self-employment because you would have written off the expenses. A lot of people that are doing gigger work, particularly if it's kind of like not something that was planned, but I need money or whatever, and they just don't know. So that is another reason. But also going back to the reason why you would submit stuff that's before your alleged onset date is before your SGA can also show the historical perspective where something came from. It could show impairments that you didn't put in your application because you don't think of them as impairments, but in fact they are, because if anything does not work where you can use it constantly in an 8-hour day, it's going to have an RFC limitation, but you have to be able to prove it. And that would happen from some of these records potentially. There was one other thing, the perspective, but also, God, what was it? I think there was another point I wanted to make. Oh, yes, the SSA itself will go back a few years before your alleged onset date. Itself, well, it'll go get medical records for you that you indicate started before your alleged onset date, even if it's before your alleged onset date. So there is no reason to suggest that they wouldn't do the same if they're going to bother with non-health provider materials. And I see they often don't ask for them. So I do think it's not a bad idea for you to get your own when it comes to non-health, non-medical provider entities. But if they're willing to look at stuff from 2 years before, why on earth wouldn't you submit it up? So I do disagree with the strategy of ignoring that stuff. I think you need all the help you can get with these cases. I think if it means extra work to get that, I think it's something you want to do, because what if those crumbs from that material would have taken a case that is on the cusp there of award versus denial and tipped it over? And certainly when you go to an ALJ, they have far more, in my opinion, discretion to really read between the lines and look at things and correlate and come to a conclusion, a finding that might not be available to adjudicators on initial and recon. So, what you do now is going to affect potentially your ALJ strength as well if you get bypassed, denied on initial and recon. So slacking off on that would not be something I would do. Okay, that's it. That is my clarification on my opinion. Reasonable professionals can disagree. We all have different practice policies. That's just mine. Okay. I will try to get the rest of your 2 other questions. I think one of them is a 2-parter, Matthew, in the days to come, if not sooner. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.